You can feel the tension, can't you? You want to see danger before danger reaches you, but you do not want fear to turn every face into a threat. This is where we must begin. Discernment helps you see clearly. Suspicion trains you to interpret fearfully. Discernment asks, what does the evidence reveal? Suspicion declares, I already know who you are. If you have endured manipulation, betrayal, or prolonged uncertainty, heightened vigilance is understandable. Your mind learned to scan the room because something painful once entered unnoticed. Honor that response. It was trying to protect you. But hear this carefully. A protective response can become a permanent prison when it is no longer disciplined by evidence. Fear may explain your alertness, but fear cannot be the final judge of another person's character. There are two dangers here. The first is blindness. If you continually excuse repeated harmful conduct, you may keep granting access where trust has not been earned. The second is suspicion. If you assign hidden motives, fixed identities, or condemning labels without evidence, you corrupt the very judgment you are trying to strengthen. One error refuses to see what is visible. The other claims to see what is hidden. Wisdom avoids both. Wisdom sharpens your sight without poisoning your heart. Relational warning content attracts sustained attention because people want language for confusing experiences, and this subject deserves careful, extended teaching. But popularity does not prove a relational claim, and a long seminar does not make an accusation true. Attention tells us the question matters. Duration gives us room to examine it responsibly. Neither gives us permission to pronounce judgment without evidence. So we will move through 5 deliberate movements. We will observe conduct. We will identify meaningful patterns. We will evaluate character fruit. We will establish proportionate boundaries. Then we will make accountable decisions with wise counsel. This is protection without paranoia, compassion without naivety, and clarity without amateur diagnosis. You do not need certainty about another person's secret motives to decide what access their conduct can responsibly support. You need honest observation, tested judgment, and the courage to act proportionately. Now the governing question becomes unavoidable. If discernment is not authorized to label people, what exactly is it authorized to evaluate? Discernment is authorized to evaluate observable conduct and what that conduct responsibly means for a decision. Write that down. Discernment is the disciplined interpretation of what can be observed for the purpose of choosing a proportionate response. It does not claim complete knowledge. It does not require complete knowledge. It asks a practical question. Given what has happened, what level of access is wise now? Suspicion is the counterfeit. Suspicion takes an unverified story about someone's motives, personality, spirituality, or pathology and treats that story as established fact. The person delays a reply, and suspicion announces why. The person resists a request, and suspicion declares what kind of person they are. Do you see the difference? Discernment interprets fruit with humility. Suspicion invents an identity with certainty. You must keep 3 columns separate: description, interpretation, and decision. Description asks, what happened? Use observable language. What was said? What was done? What agreement was kept or broken? Interpretation asks, what may this conduct indicate? Notice the word may. Interpretation considers meaning without pretending to read the heart. Decision asks, what access is wise now? That is where observation becomes responsible action. Confusion begins when these columns collapse. They interrupted me twice is a description. They may not be willing to hear disagreement is an interpretation to be tested. I will not place them in charge of this sensitive conversation yet is a decision. But they interrupted me, therefore I know their hidden condition and everything they intend is not discernment. That is a conclusion outrunning the evidence. Now hear this carefully. You do not need to define a person in order to protect a responsibility. You may limit disclosure without giving them a clinical label. You may reduce availability without issuing a spiritual verdict. You may withhold responsibility without condemning their identity. You may increase distance without claiming certainty about their motives. A limit concerns what you will entrust. A label claims to explain what someone is. Those are not the same authority. So ask yourself the hard questions. Am I responding to conduct I observed, a pattern I verified, or a story fear supplied? Can I state the facts without adjectives that secretly contain an accusation? Is my interpretation open to correction? Is my decision proportionate to the evidence and the risk? These questions do not weaken protection. They purify it. Remember the maxim: a limit may be justified even when a label is not. You are permitted to govern disclosure, availability, responsibility, and proximity according to observable fruit. You are not permitted to turn uncertainty into a verdict about another person's hidden identity. But another question now appears: how much observation is enough? When is conduct merely an incident? When does it become a pattern? And when is one event severe enough to require immediate protection? That requires the discipline of time, repetition, context, and severity. A pattern is not merely something unpleasant that happened more than once. A pattern is conduct that becomes meaningfully consistent across time, contexts, or opportunities, especially after expectations have been clearly stated. The issue is not only did this happen again. The deeper question is what repeatedly happens when this person meets correction, pressure, responsibility, or a clear boundary. Write this principle into your thinking. Time does not create character. Time gives character repeated opportunities to become visible. Now, memory alone is not enough, because pain can magnify one moment and affection can minimize 10. Create a factual observation record. Note the date, the specific conduct, the context, the impact, any expectation or clarification previously given, and what the person did afterward. Did they acknowledge the effect? Did they repair what was damaged? Did they adjust their conduct? Or did they deny, deflect, repeat, and escalate? Record what occurred. Omit the motive you cannot verify. Do not reduce this process to mechanical counting. 3 minor misunderstandings are not automatically more revealing than 1 serious breach. Evaluate frequency. How often does it occur? Severity. How much harm or risk does it create? Escalation. Is the conduct intensifying? Context. Does it appear only under unusual strain or whenever the person is denied what they want? Consistency. Does the same tendency appear in different situations and with different people? And very important, examine response. What happens after the conduct is named clearly? This protects you from 2 opposite distortions. Fear can inflate one awkward conversation, honest mistake, or ordinary disagreement into a permanent verdict on character. Wishful thinking can take recurring conduct and rename every repetition another exception. Fear says 1 incident proves everything. Wishful thinking says 20 incidents prove nothing. Discernment refuses both exaggeration and denial. But hear the safeguard. Patience does not mean compulsory exposure. Some conduct carries enough severity that one event may justify immediate distance, urgent boundaries, or qualified local help. You are not required to collect additional incidents where another exposure could bring serious harm. A pattern increases confidence in judgment. It is not an entrance fee for protection. So ask calmly, was the expectation clear? Was there another genuine opportunity to choose differently? Is the conduct repeating across time or circumstance? What happened after clarification? Is the risk low enough for continued observation or high enough to require action now? This is how impressions become usable judgment. You observe patiently without surrendering safety, and you act promptly without inventing identity. Once the record shows what is isolated, what is recurring, and what is severe, the next question is not merely whether fruit exists. The question is what kind of fruit the conduct is producing and what that fruit reveals about trust. What kind of fruit deserves your attention? Use 5 questions. I call them the fruit audit. This is a decision-making heuristic, not a clinical instrument, not a spiritual diagnosis, and not a declaration of anyone's total worth. It helps you evaluate conduct for one practical purpose, determining what degree of trust the evidence can responsibly support. F stands for follow-through. Do words, promises, and repeated actions increasingly align? Anyone can make a commitment when speaking is easy. The revealing moment comes when keeping that commitment costs time, comfort, convenience, or pride. Follow-through does not mean flawless performance. It means that promises matter enough to guide action. And when circumstances prevent completion, the person communicates honestly rather than quietly abandoning the agreement. R stands for respect. Does the person recognize another human being's dignity, time, property, privacy, pace, role, and right to say no? Respect is not merely pleasant language. It becomes visible when another person has a preference, boundary, or decision that creates inconvenience. Charm welcomes agreement. Respect remains present when agreement is absent. U stands for use of power. Very important. How does the person handle influence, information, authority, dependency, status, or privileged access? Power is anything that gives someone an advantage in a relationship. Do they use that advantage to serve responsibility or to escape accountability? Do they protect what was entrusted or exploit what another person cannot easily refuse? You learn much about conduct by observing how someone treats people who cannot reward them and people who may be afraid to challenge them. I stands for integrity. Does truth remain important when concealment, image management, blame, or convenience would be easier? Integrity asks whether the account changes according to the audience. It examines whether facts are presented honestly when honesty may cost approval. Integrity is not the absence of embarrassment. It is the refusal to make deception the solution to embarrassment. T stands for taking responsibility. Can the person acknowledge their conduct and its impact, make amends where possible, and demonstrate change over time? Notice the sequence: acknowledgement, amends, adjustment. Words may begin responsibility, but altered conduct gives those words weight. Consider a neutral workplace lapse. One colleague misses a commitment, discloses it promptly, accepts the impact, helps correct the problem, and changes the process that contributed to the failure. Another misses the same commitment, conceals the lapse, changes the account when questioned, and redirects blame. The missed commitment is similar, the fruit afterward is not. One response gives trust a basis for careful recovery, the other gives you reason to reduce what you entrust. Write this down. Character becomes visible where commitment, boundaries, power, truth, and responsibility meet pressure. That is why trust should not grow merely from charm, intensity, familiarity, status, or fearful speculation. It should grow from observable fruit. And do not misuse the audit. A weak result in one area does not authorize a total verdict on a human being. Fruit informs degrees of trust. What information, responsibility, proximity, or influence is wise at this time? It evaluates readiness for access, not ultimate human value. Yet one category now demands closer attention. People will fail. The decisive question is often what they do next. Taking responsibility leads us directly to repair because an apology may address the moment, while sustained repair reveals whether trust has a responsible future. Safe relationships are not relationships in which nobody disappoints you, hurts you, corrects you, or misunderstands you. That is not safety. That is perfection. And perfection is unavailable wherever human beings are involved. Relational safety is revealed by what happens when failure enters the relationship. Can truth be spoken? Can impact be acknowledged? Can responsibility produce change? Repair is the responsible response to relational damage. It has an order. First, hear the concern without immediately preparing a defense. Second, acknowledge the relevant facts and the impact, even when the impact was not intended. Third, own your part without counterattack, blame shifting, or making the injured person comfort you. Fourth, make an appropriate amendment where possible. Finally, sustain change conduct long enough for the new direction to become observable. Very important. Emotion is not the same as repair. Tears may be sincere. Regret may be intense. Shame may be painful. But a person can feel terrible about losing approval, access, comfort, reputation, or control without taking responsibility for the conduct that caused the loss. Remorse about consequences asks, how do I make this discomfort stop? Responsibility asks, what did I do? What did it affect? And what must I change? Do you see the distinction? An emotional apology may sound powerful in one conversation. Accountable repair becomes visible across many ordinary choices. The words say, I understand. The next opportunity shows whether understanding governs conduct. The promise says, it will be different. Time reveals whether different has become a practice. Write this down. An apology addresses a moment. Accountable change addresses the pattern. An apology can begin repair, but it cannot complete repair by announcement. If the same conduct returns, the same excuses return, and the same burden is placed on you to absorb it, repeated apologies may simply be maintaining the cycle. Discernment listens to the words, then watches what follows. But do not become cynical. One failure followed by honest ownership, appropriate amends, and durable change should not automatically become a permanent identity sentence. Mercy leaves room for growth. Accountability requires evidence of it. You can remember what happened without imprisoning a person inside the worst moment you observed. Now, turn the audit inward. Do you hear concerns without retaliation? Can you name your part without attaching a countercharge? Do your apologies reduce the burden you created or merely reduce your embarrassment? Are you asking others to demonstrate a kind of responsibility you resist practicing yourself? This is how mercy and accountability remain together. You neither demand flawlessness nor reward repetition. And once repair is clearly defined, the next question becomes practical. What boundary will make the expectation unmistakable and future conduct easier to evaluate without turning that boundary into punishment, manipulation, or a secret test? A boundary answers that practical question with clarity. A boundary is a clear statement of what access, participation, or response you will choose under specified conditions. Notice where the responsibility rests, not on controlling another person, but on governing what you disclose, permit, provide, or continue. Write this down. Kindness concerns how you value a person. Access concerns what you responsibly entrust to that person. You may preserve goodwill while limiting disclosure. You may remain courteous while reducing availability. You may honor someone's dignity without granting unrestricted proximity, money, influence, or responsibility. Human worth is not measured by the access you provide. Access is assigned according to what the evidence can support. Content framed around kindness, disrespect, and excessive niceness has attracted substantial viewer attention. That attention shows that many people feel tension around these questions. It does not prove a universal rule about every relationship. Engagement reveals concern. It does not settle judgment. Your decision must still be grounded in actual conduct, risk, repair, and responsibility. Now understand the difference between a boundary and a threat. A threat says comply or I will make you suffer. A punishment attempts to inflict pain. A trap conceals the standard and waits for failure. A secret loyalty test demands that someone guess what would prove devotion. A boundary states the relevant condition and the action within your control. Its purpose is not to engineer failure. Its purpose is to make protection and expectation understandable. Suppose a friend has repeatedly shared information you gave in confidence. You do not need to diagnose the friend or deliver a verdict on their identity. You can say, because private matters I shared were repeated, I will not discuss sensitive information with you for now. If confidentiality becomes consistent, I can reconsider that level of disclosure. That is specific. It names conduct, regulates access, and leaves future evaluation connected to observable change. Then pay attention to the response. Respectful questions and honest negotiation provide information. So do ridicule, pressure, evasion, or retaliation. But do not provoke a reaction so you can catch the person failing. State the boundary because it is necessary, not because you want a dramatic piece of evidence. Discernment observes what naturally follows clarity. Suspicion manufactures a test and calls the result proof. And if personal safety is at risk, do not make a careful conversation the price of protection. Immediate distance and qualified local support take priority. Clarity is valuable, but safety does not depend on obtaining another person's agreement. This is how discernment becomes action without hostility. You preserve dignity, state what you control, and align access with demonstrated fruit. But when the evidence is mixed, neither wholly reassuring nor wholly alarming how much access is appropriate. Trust must now become graduated, because responsible access is rarely all or nothing. Trust is not one undivided possession. Trust is a series of permissions, and each permission carries a different consequence. The mistake is believing you must either trust a person with everything or remove them from everything. That is binary thinking. Discernment is more precise. Picture trust as a ladder. The first level is courtesy without vulnerability. You can be respectful, civil, and humane without sharing private information or depending on the person. The second level is limited cooperation. You may work together on defined matters where expectations are clear and the risk is manageable. The third level is tested personal confidence. Here, greater disclosure and closer involvement are supported by consistent follow-through, respect, responsible use of power, integrity, and taking responsibility. The fourth level is high responsibility reliance. This includes permissions with serious consequences, financial dependence, leadership, intimate partnership, substantial authority, or responsibility for something difficult to restore. Do you see the principle? Warmth does not automatically establish suitability. Someone may be pleasant company yet unreliable with confidential information. Another person may perform a narrow task well but remain unprepared for leadership. Familiarity may explain affection, but it does not prove readiness for influence. A title may describe a role, but it does not manufacture the character needed to carry it. Write this down. The greater the consequence of misplaced trust, the stronger the evidence required for access. Consider four things. What fruit has been observed? How serious is the possible risk? What responsibilities does the role contain? What quality of repair followed previous failure? Low consequence cooperation may require modest evidence. High consequence reliance requires stronger consistency because more people, resources, or responsibilities may be affected. Now make the decision accountable. Create a brief note containing 5 items: the present access level, the factual reasons for it, the boundary you will maintain, the observable conditions that could justify change, and a date for review. Not a private accusation, not a catalog of insults. A decision record. This keeps affection from rewriting history and fear from turning temporary caution into a permanent sentence. Review is not indecision. Review is disciplined responsibility. Trust may rise when sustained conduct supports greater reliance. Trust may fall when repeated conduct contradicts previous confidence. Movement in either direction should follow evidence, not pressure. You are not promising that every relationship will advance to the highest level. You are promising that your decisions will remain connected to reality. And notice what remains within your authority: your time, disclosure, collaboration, responsibility, and proximity. You cannot control another person's identity, but you can govern what you entrust. Trust should be assigned by evidence and responsibility, not demanded by familiarity or denied by fear. Yet even a well-constructed ladder can be positioned poorly when attachment, anger, or anxiety distorts judgment. That is why the next safeguard is wise counsel, not a crowd recruited to agree with you, but accountability that tests your decision without taking responsibility for it. Wise counsel begins where private certainty becomes willing to be examined. Counsel is not an audience for your accusation. It is a disciplined setting in which your interpretation, your emotions, and your proposed response can be tested. A coalition is assembled to confirm a verdict, spread indignation, or punish someone socially. Counsel seeks clarity. A coalition seeks agreement. This distinction is very important because gossip can disguise itself as accountability. Repeating loaded conclusions to many people may feel like gathering wisdom when you are actually gathering votes. If everyone you consult already shares your anger, depends on your approval, or hears only the version designed to produce outrage, your perspective has not been tested. It has merely been multiplied. Choose a small number of mature, discreet, independent people. They should understand enough of the relevant context to evaluate the matter, protect confidential information, and care more about truth than about pleasing you. A useful counselor must be willing to say, your concern is justified, but also your conclusion goes beyond the evidence, or your proposed boundary is too severe. Agreement is comforting. Honest challenge is protective. Bring the factual record. Describe what occurred, how often it occurred, what expectation had been made clear, what impact followed, and how the person responded afterward. Leave the condemning adjectives at home. Then ask, is the pattern sufficiently clear? Is my response proportionate to the evidence and the risk? Does any serious issue involving safety, authority, law, health, or specialized responsibility require qualified help beyond ordinary relational advice? And ask the questions that expose your own blind spots. What am I overlooking? What evidence contradicts my interpretation? Have I confused discomfort with danger? Am I protecting peace or avoiding necessary truth? Am I reducing access responsibly or using distance to retaliate? A counselor who cannot question you cannot truly counsel you. The community teaching represented in E12 connects loving leadership and belonging with protection from loneliness. Receive that within its proper boundary. It expresses that source's teaching. It is not broad empirical proof for every claim about every community. Still, the practical principle is sound within this framework. Healthy community can reduce isolation and widen perspective. Isolation can make one interpretation feel like the only interpretation available. But hear this clearly. Counsel does not inherit your responsibility. Others may test the record, identify missing evidence, recommend specialized help, and challenge your proportionality. You must still decide what you will entrust. Make that decision accountable. Tell a counselor what boundary you will implement, when you will review it, and what observable evidence would justify increasing or decreasing access. Wise counsel does not borrow your responsibility. It protects your decision from your blind spots. Now the method is complete enough to travel. The question becomes whether the same standard can govern family, friendship, dating, church, and work, and whether you display the character fruit you require from others. A sound standard does not change its character when the relationship changes. It may change the boundary, the risk, the channel, and the level of access, but it still asks the same question: what does observable conduct responsibly support? Every scenario that follows is hypothetical. A brief illustration cannot prove anything about a real person, family, congregation, or organization. It only demonstrates how the method travels. In a family relationship, affection may exist alongside recurring ridicule. Do not deny the affection, and do not let affection erase the conduct. Describe what was said, record whether it repeats, and state the conditions under which conversation can continue. You may end an exchange when mockery begins and seek discreet counsel without declaring that you know anyone's spiritual condition. In friendship, repeated breaches of confidence affect the level of disclosure that evidence can support. Reduce sensitive sharing. Communicate why. Then watch what follows. Does the friend acknowledge the breach? Protect information consistently and repair the damage. Future trust should grow from future follow-through, not from pressure to restore yesterday's access today. In dating, pay close attention when the pace of the relationship is pressured or a clear no is treated as betrayal. The relevant fruit questions are respect and use of power. Is freedom honored when the answer is inconvenient? Slow the relationship. Limit access. Invite grounded counsel to test your judgment. You do not need to win an argument about hidden motives before responding to observable pressure. In a church setting, influence should not make conduct immune from honest questions. If concerns arise, focus on documented actions, transparent process, meaningful accountability, and the appropriate authorities for the matter. Do not substitute public outrage for responsible procedure, and do not claim access to another person's unseen spiritual state. Evaluate what can be established. Pursue the process the responsibility requires. At work, repeated credit-taking or blame-shifting calls for precision. Document particular events. Clarify roles, ownership, and expectations. Regulate collaboration according to risk, and use established workplace channels when necessary. The purpose is neither retaliation nor character assassination. It is to protect the work, the people, and the responsibilities involved. Now the method must travel one more place back to you. Write this down. Discernment is not only a window through which you inspect others, it is also a mirror in which you examine yourself. Do my words increasingly align with my actions? Do I respect another person's no when it limits what I want? How do I use influence when I possess an advantage? Do I tell the truth when truth may cost me approval? When I cause harm, do I acknowledge it, make amends, and change? This reciprocal standard protects discernment from becoming self-righteous surveillance. You cannot responsibly demand follow-through while excusing your inconsistency. Request. Respect while punishing boundaries. Question another's power while misusing your own. Require integrity while editing your account, or expect repair while resisting responsibility. The standard by which you assign access to others must also become the standard by which you cultivate your own character. Now gather the record, the F-root audit, the boundary, the access level, the counsel, and the review date. One relationship, one written decision. That final practice will not give you perfect certainty about another heart, but it can restore confidence in how you observe, choose, and remain accountable. Now bring the entire method onto one page. Choose one relationship that genuinely requires clarity, not necessarily the relationship producing the loudest emotion. Drama attracts attention, but responsibility identifies the decision that must actually be made. Draw 2 columns. In the first, write observable facts, particular conduct, dates, or context, clarified expectations, consequences, and responses. In the second, write the story you are currently telling about those facts. Every unverified motive belongs in the second column. Every fixed label belongs there too. You may have an interpretation, but you must not promote interpretation into evidence simply because it feels convincing. Next, classify the concern. Is it an isolated incident, a recurring pattern, an escalating pattern, or a severe event? If the conduct presents serious risk, protection and qualified help may be appropriate immediately. You do not need repeated exposure to earn permission to act. If the risk is lower, repetition, context, and response to correction will help determine direction. Now apply fruit. What do the observations show about follow-through, respect, use of power, integrity, and taking responsibility? Do not ask whether the person passes as a human being. Ask what the present evidence supports you in trusting. Then select the current level of access and write one boundary you can enforce through your own choices. Make it specific enough to practice, not dramatic enough to impress. Name one mature counselor. Write the precise question you need that person to test. Am I interpreting beyond the evidence? Is this boundary proportionate? Am I overlooking risk, repair, or contrary facts? Then establish a review date. Between now and then, observe subsequent fruit. Do not reopen the entire case every morning according to your mood. Finally, add one line concerning yourself. What truth must I tell? What apology, repair, or boundary communication do I owe? Accountability that examines only the other person is incomplete. Write this down. Confidence does not require the ability to read every heart. Confidence grows when your process is trustworthy, when you observe honestly, classify carefully, decide proportionately, seek wise correction, and answer for your own conduct. You can remain willing to love without making yourself available for every form of access. You can protect responsibility without becoming governed by suspicion. Clear sight can guard the gate without closing the heart.